So, Michael, what did you think of Chris Cornell's demo for Black Hole Sun when you first heard it?
I'll never forget when I first heard that song. I called him up and I remember the first thing out of my mouth was, "You're a fucking genius." And he's like, "What? What?" I'm like, "Seriously,
That's
what you
awesome.
did?" He's like, "What did I do?" It's one of those things where you know exactly where you are, you remember exactly where you are when you hear it. You know, um, I remember it as clear as day. I remember the room in this old house I was living in that I was listening to it, where I was listening to it, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like from the very first notes, it was at the end of this tape. I don't even know if Chris realized how he'd sequenced the songs on this tape,
Mhm.
but he did it in whatever it was. It was in such a way where he literally saved the best for last, and it was a whole experience getting to it. Like it started with Fell on Black Days, and then there was another song that he did with Jerry Cantrell, which was great, but was more of a blues rock song. And then he did a song called Tighter and Tighter, which I loved, and I wish that we'd cut for Superunknown, but the band voted it off the record. And then finally, there's this song at the end, and I'm waiting for it. I was like, okay, this is good. This is really good. And then the first notes come on, and I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
It just instantaneously, like, what am I listening to? Because, I mean, the chord structures were so bizarre to me. Like, I hadn't heard anyone do anything like this before. I mean, it was beautiful, but at the same time, it was definitely very abstract. And I mean, I wouldn't say dissonant. It was, I don't even know what kind of music you could really compare it to.
Yeah.
And then the song kicks in, and I'm like, this is incredible. So at that point, I'm kind of like on the edge of my seat
Yeah.
because I've seen similar movies like this before. And the movie goes like, song starts out amazing, then the chorus hits, and then all of a sudden, you know,
Yeah.
it's the whole thing sags, and then you go, all right, well, we got some work to do. Obviously, I don't want to do that work or go back to the songwriter, you've got work to do. So I'm sitting there going like, I'm not ready for what's gonna, because I've already made a tremendous emotional investment in the song from listening to it. So I get closer and closer to the chorus, and everything's perfect, like literally, like nothing is out of place about it at all. And then the chorus hits, and I'm like, oh,
That's awesome.
you know, because it's absolutely perfect. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing about it that's off. I'm like, this is a fully formed piece of pure genius that just got rained on this guy. Like, I mean, I get choked up just thinking about it. It was incredible. It was so gorgeous, that one moment. And it had a really powerful, like emotional effect on me too. And I couldn't stop listening to it. It was really extraordinary. So yeah, it hit me with both barrels. And I told him, he was like, "Oh, you like it?" And I was like it? I told him, and he was actually kind of surprised.
Hmm.
It surprised me. But then what I found even more surprising was when I went around to other people and was like, people in the band, even people I play it for. I was like, I mean, it's incredible. And everyone would be like, "Yeah, it's okay." I'd be like, "What?
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay. Are we listening to the same song here?
Yeah.
Like, it's not okay." And they're like, yeah. I mean, at one point, I spoke to one of the guys in the band. And they were kind of like, yeah, well, I was talking about when we record it, and they're like, yeah, we'll see. We'll see if we record it. I was like,
If? Yeah.
oh, what?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that's the story about that one. I actually played it for my manager too, and he had a similar response. And at that point, I didn't feel like I'd taken crazy pills or anything like
Yeah.
that, but I was just like, okay, well, everyone's wrong and I'm right.
Yeah.
Because this song is incredible and I know it's incredible.
Oh, for sure. And that's interesting that you mentioned that because I was going to ask you, Chris has gone on record saying that he was surprised that that song did as well as it did. And it actually, to a degree, kind of bummed him out that that was the biggest song on the record because he felt that there were other songs that were of a higher caliber, so to speak.
It's funny to hear you say that now, actually, because I think that he recognized the kind of power that song had. That I think Chris was a lot more aware, at least my experience of him. He was a lot more aware of the effect of the music that he wrote.
Hmm.
And I think he looked at it as kind of like he had a good stockpile of songs, and he knew that that song was really was, I mean, for lack of a better word, powerful currency.
Hmm.
You know, so I never had that experience with him. I mean, I think that in fact, it was the one song on the record where he did two passes on that, two separate days, and he did his first vocal for it. I comped it, and he came back and listened to it, and he just looked at me. He's like, "Sucks. We got to do it over." That's I've never seen a vocalist do that before, where they actually listen back to their own work and are like, "It's not good enough." And I was pretty impressed by that. But he knew that he had to do it again. He felt very strongly that it wasn't good enough. So he put 110% into that one. And he was well aware that that was, at least in my experience, that was actually the showpiece of the record. I mean, the record was great, and it would have been great without it. But
Hmm.
the fact that that was there, that kind of sealed the deal on it.
No, for sure. So, I mean, for someone, you were probably the person that was most excited about that song going into recording it. So the time comes around to record it now in studio. How are you feeling? Are you still excited to get this down?
Yeah, I mean, I was excited. I was a little nervous because I had a very high expectation of what we were going to live up to. I mean, it was an excited kind of nervous. Like I just wanted to dive into it and make it as great as it could possibly be. And from every step of the way, it was never a letdown. Like when Matt started playing the song, I was like, oh my goodness.
Hmm.
I mean, he did three passes of the song, and I think the second or third take he played this extraordinary drum fill, which of course is on. It comes in right before the final chorus of the
Hmm.
that boom 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 psh, like that. And I was like, oh, that's it. That's incredible. We put the bass on. It sounds great. And then we did the guitar. It sounded great. Like every step of the way, it was just magical.
Yeah.
It just kept getting better and better and better and better. And obviously, my intent was to make sure that whatever we had was far outstripped the demo. I mean, the demo is actually really good. You can find it on YouTube, in
Hmm.
fact. But we definitely wound up smoking the demo pretty well, so I was happy about that.
That's awesome. And so, in terms of Kim's guitar work, that solo near the end of the song, it's not only is the solo good, but the way it's recorded, it sounds very different than a lot of the other solos that were coming out at that point in time. How did you approach recording his guitars for that record?
Well, Kim had a particular setup that he liked, and we didn't really deviate too far away from it because he was adamant about it. It was actually one of the worst sounding rigs I've ever heard in my entire
Hmm.
life. Um,
Interesting.
it, yeah, and it really wasn't very useful for rhythm guitar stuff at all. So, but for whatever reason, when it came time to do solos, it, what he was playing through suited it pretty well. On Black Hole Sun, we recorded a bunch of leads, and I think we had at least two tracks of like backward guitar.
Hmm.
So when came time for Brendan to mix, he had one track of like forward guitar and one track of backward guitar, and he just kind of like faded them in and out. Kim just, he laid them down, and then he couldn't really make up his mind about what he liked. So he polled everyone in the room, and we were all like, "You've got enough stuff there. It really sounds good. I'm sure between all the passes that you've done, we've got enough to work with." But he wasn't satisfied, so he just called his friends up and had them come to the studio and listen. And I think for like about the next 3 hours, it was all about people just kind of reassuring him and telling him that he'd played it really well and that there probably wasn't anything that he could have done better. Um, so finally, after a while, we were able to move away from it.
That's so cool. And so, how is Kim in general as a guitarist to work with? What's he like in the studio?
Um, he was pretty distracted. for the
Really?
most part. I mean, honestly, like Chris played most of the rhythm guitar on the record.
Hmm.
Um, Kim was kind of he was funny in the studio because he would show up late most days and he wouldn't get started until much later in the evening. And you know, most of the time you couldn't get a whole lot of work out of him.
Really?
But he was a real yeah, I mean, but the thing is that he's one of the most gifted conversationalists I've ever met, and just really fun to hang out with.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, he's a terrific guitarist as well. I don't think that he was really into playing a lot of the rhythm guitar parts, so it was easier. I mean, for the songs that Chris wrote, Chris played his rhythm parts, and he did all the arpeggios. He did everything on Black Hole Sun except for the leads. Black Black Hole Sun didn't exist as far as I
Hmm.
knew before I started working with them. When I began the project, they sent me a demo tape which had about 10 or 11 ideas on it. And of those 10 ideas, I think five of them were actually workable.
Hmm.
And the rest of it was it was all just like experiments and jams and things like that. And I was like, we can't make a record off this. So I had to tell them, like, we can't rush into the studio yet because you guys don't have enough material to make a record. I don't think they were very happy about that, but it was the truth. And it was about a 2 month period between the time I got that tape and the time that we started working. And in that time, that, to my knowledge, is when Black Hole Sun was created. It was I to the best of my knowledge, it was after a particular conversation that I had with Chris about songwriting. I wasn't specifically directing him to write more melodic songs. I was really just directing him to go toward the things that he felt he liked as a songwriter. It wasn't about, hey, you need to write more melodic songs. It was like, no, just write things that vibe with you, that you feel comfortable with, that you like, or I should say that you love. Um, and because he pretty much he'd been sending me so much stuff at that point. I know that if Black Hole Sun existed in any form, I would have gotten it long before that. Because he was actually sending me songs at that point. He sent me one song, which is a country song that he'd written for Johnny Cash,
Hmm.
because Rick Rubin had been pumping him for material for the one of those Cash records that he did.
That is so cool. And so, do you remember the recording process, particularly for Black Hole Sun?
Yeah, it was like all the other songs, pretty much. Drums first, bass guitar. Then we did all his Leslie guitars, which is that rotating speaker sound that you hear at the beginning of the song, and
Okay.
that's yeah, that's pretty much. We changed speeds for a couple of the tracks. Yeah, he did those, and then some other guitar parts, and then he did all his vocals.
One of the things that I read about your work with Chris Cornell that I thought was really interesting, and I wanted to understand why. Apparently, you made him listen to Frank Sinatra before he recorded vocals. Is this correct?
We did the songs in batches of four, and after the first four songs, I mean, I was liking what I was getting, but I still felt there was always a certain amount of restraint that I felt from Chris. Like he wasn't always just kind of like giving, excuse me, everything that he had emotionally. That was my sense of it, and I just wanted to get that, a little bit more out of him. And I just started thinking of all the different ways I could do that. And I would always go back to Sinatra because I always felt as one of the consummate pop vocalists of the 20th century, and really in history. His use of dynamics, like the way he would go from powerful to very soft, like he really used his voice as this instrument with such immense range. It was phenomenal. And I played two songs for Chris, just to kind of give him an idea of what I was talking about. Uh, and when I got done, he kind of looked at me and started laughing. And he's like, "All right, thanks very much. I
That's
appreciate it."
hilarious.
And he just walked out of the room.
That's funny.
But then it was really funny because I mean, he completely, just shut me down on the whole thing. And I was like, well, all right, I tried at least. But then I started listening back to some of his vocal performances later on, and I realized that he'd begun to incorporate some of
There we
what
go.
he'd heard. Yeah, I mean, the thing was is that I found that pop vocalists, especially in rock, that they would do their vocal performances kind of like in blocks. Like
Mhm.
the vocal sits here, dum da dum da dum, stop, dum da dum da dum, stop, dum da dum da dum, stop. There was no ad lib. There was no kind of going over the bar line. There was no drawing out of a particular lyric to kind of in a way that a vocalist like Sinatra or even people in rock bands like in the Beatles or Zeppelin, people would play with lyrics more. And by the 90s, they pretty much stopped doing that completely. There wasn't any experimenting with dynamics or ways to kind of make the song take root more emotionally. And I noticed when I listened to the vocal on Black Hole Sun, for example, I was like, you fuck. You're actually doing it. I was like, you listen, good.
That's awesome. So in general, how
Yeah.
is Chris to work with as a vocalist? Like, what did you think of his approach in the studio, his abilities? What are your thoughts on all that whole thing?
Um, what can you say? I mean, Chris was one of the greatest rock vocalists ever, in my opinion. Um, I also found that he was incredibly uncomfortable singing in the studio. Like, I just got the sense that he didn't like to have people around him very much when he did what he did.
Hmm.
So the first batch of 4 songs that on that record, which were, I think, Kickstand, um, My Wave, Spoonman, and can't remember the last one.
Mhm.
Uh, he'd done it, he'd cut everything in the recording studio with myself and the engineer there. And we did it the way we would normally record a vocalist, do a bunch of passes and I just felt like there was something missing. And it just occurred to me suddenly that like I said, he just wasn't comfortable singing around people. And I kind of flashed back to an experience I had where I saw him perform on stage at Roseland
Hmm.
in New York. And he was like, this the entire time hunched over, but you just got this vibe that he wasn't connecting with the audience and he didn't like it. And I was like, all right, we're going to try something different. So I set him up in the studio because I knew that he was a home recordist, like he did all his own demos.
Mhm.
So I set him up in the studio with his vocal mic in the room, and we tried headphones, and then we tried doing this thing where you can put speakers out of phase with one another. So one side is in, one side is out of the near field monitors. In this case, we're using Yamaha and S10s,
Hmm.
and you aim those to the back of the microphone, which is in a cardioid pattern, and that means that only the front of the mic is picking up. The rear of the mic is completely rejecting anything that comes out of it. So you've got an out of phase signal. So that all the bass is being cut out, and it's all being aimed at the back of the microphone. So you can hear it in the room, but everything that could be detrimental in terms of pickup into the microphone is mainly traveling into the back of the mic.
Hmm.
And we actually compared it, and it turned out that the speakers had less feed into the microphone than the headphones. So we were completely sold on this. So he did all his vocals like that. He knew how to. Showed him how to arm and the tape machine and change tracks at the patch bay, and we pretty much left him alone. I was like, you do as many tracks of the vocal passes of this song as you want. When you're done, just come down to the lounge where we'll be rating. Get us. I'll come up, listen, and if we're all happy, we'll make a comp, and that'll be the song. And he started working that way, and he came down to the lounge about a half hour later, and he was complete like flushed, and he was like, "I'm never working any other way again. This is
That is awesome.
amazing." Like
So,
he was so happy.
that is so cool. So, I heard that
Yeah,
that during your sessions with him, his voice apparently broke two compressor mics. Like it was something along those lines. Is that accurate?
not a compressor mic. It's the microphone itself, and it wasn't two. We were using these Neumann U87 microphones, which are the capsules. They're condenser mics, so they're not really designed for like massive amounts of SPL sound pressure level.
Hmm.
This guy, obviously, he could yell.
Yeah.
He had a lot of SPL. So gradually, what he was doing was he was and I had him singing right up on the mic
Uh-huh.
because I wanted a lot of proximity from him. I didn't care about what happened to the diaphragm at that point, So I had him up close on the mic. So he was slowly destroying the mics,
Jeez.
essentially. And I think the studio had five, and I believe that we went through all five of them.
Really?
I'm pretty sure that he destroyed the capsules on all five of the microphones because I remember Reed Ruddy, who was the studio manager, coming to me with bills, and he was like, and I was like,
Dude.
I'm
Man.
sorry, I mean, at least they're not rare vintage microphones,
Yeah,
so it
yeah.
wasn't impossible to get him, to get him recapsuled. Uh, but oh well, art calls.
That is that is really cool. I heard that I think you may have said it that Chris has two different vocal ranges. Was that you who said that? Someone in the camp said that about him. And would that be fair to say?
Well, I mean, he had a lot of different ones, but I found that my issue was that I had a hard time finding a microphone that would really capture everything. So when we first started recording him, I could only find two mics that worked with him, and both of them were in different ranges. So initially, what I did for the first four songs was record his voice in one range
Hmm.
where he was singing, and then I went back with the other mic and recorded the other range, which is pretty ass backwards actually. But like I, there were too many ingredients in the equation. Like I just wanted him up on the mic so much, and I just couldn't get what I wanted out of any one microphone. And we went through about like 30, I think.
Wow. So, going back to Frank Sinatra for a moment, what else was it about Frank Sinatra as a singer that made you feel he'd be a good influence for Chris Cornell?
He was an amazing stylist, but also he could really he could project emotionally and communicate really clearly everything that he was trying to get across. And obviously, he sang a lot of upbeat, happy
Yeah.
songs, but this comes across especially on three records in particular. The In the wee small hours of the morning, Only the Lonely, and the record he did with Antonio Carlos Jobim,
Hmm.
um, which is all Brazilian music. And those records have more of like a wistful kind of melancholy. So I mean, some of them are downright depressing. And his ability to be able to kind of put you into his frame of reference as a listener and really kind of commune with you on that level, I think is really a paramount example for any vocalist, not to follow what he's doing and trying to emulate his style, but just to see how he's kind of getting all this across, like his phrasing, how he actually got a lot of his ideas for phrasing from being in a band with Tommy Dorsey, who was a trombonist.
Hmm.
So you can hear that type stuff that sounds like a trombone move.
So I read a quote from Adam Casper where he said that essentially you had a quote electronic music agenda when you were making this record. What does that mean exactly?
An agenda. Um, I was. It was interesting because I had the electronics, as I think I explained it to Adam, was kind of like something that sort of drove me a little bit. Um, I kind of conceived of this whole thing as being sort of larger than life. Like I had this concept of like hyper reality in a way.
Hmm.
Um, I'm a big fan of photorealist painters like Chuck Close,
Hmm.
and I wanted to create this record where you could kind of like feel everything, where there was sort of like a tangible, sort of like sense around vibe to the music that, when Matt hit the snare, that you felt like you were almost inside the snare, like you could see the snares rattling and feel the impact of it. And I didn't feel that people were making rock records that really had this kind of excitement to them anymore. I mean, certainly people were making great records at that point, but I felt like there was a kind of they were sort of catering more to like the genre. Like there were specific genres
Yeah.
that were being etched out in various types of rock, and people were sort of gradually setting into whatever their genre was. And obviously, Soundgarden were considered to be a grunge rock band. They've kind of been pegged into this sort of into that subgenre. And I had a tremendous issue with that because I didn't see them that way. And I didn't think that it was right to kind of to to create that kind of perception for them, to reinforce that perception. To me, it was kind of it was selling them short. And I think it was kind of like cutting them off at the leg, so to speak.
Hmm.
So they wouldn't be able to grow. It's like this is a rock band. They're not a grunge rock band. They're just a rock band. You know, let's give them as much space as they can. Or you could say that they're a bunch of popular musicians who use guitars and drums. You know,
Hmm.
why can't it be as loose as that? So to me, I wanted to create a record that had this immediacy to it, and the only place I could find that immediacy was in electronic music, was in like stuff like techno and Aphex Twin and things like that. Um, because there was so much aggression, and there are a lot of sampled sounds in the music, which of course is digitized sound. It's the transients are very quick and synthesizers that are distorted, and it was very exciting, and it was missing to me all the aggression that rock music just didn't seem to have as much of anymore.
That's interesting. In addition to your producing, which was very different from what they did before, the songs themselves that Soundgarden recorded for that record were in some ways a departure from their previous sound. Did they ever discuss with you why they went in a more melodic direction, so to speak?
Well, I I mean, I'm going to take as much credit for that as I think they should.
Okay.
You know, especially when it came to Chris. I mean, from the outset of the recording, I felt it was very important that not only was the music that they composed for this record the very best that they could come up with, I really encouraged the rest of the guys in the band to come with their as many of their own compositions as possible. I wanted to make sure that there was like a very broad contribution from the band to this record, which I think to a great extent there was. But with Chris, since he was the primary songwriter, I really felt that it was essential that his songs were the absolute cream of the crop for him. And I noticed that he was starting to kind of fall into this um, headspace where a lot of the music that he was coming up with, the songs he was coming up with, were kind of they were sort of so. Like they weren't that exciting. And I started to get really worried about that. So I had a conversation with him about it. And I really tried to reorient his thinking in terms of what kinds of songs that he wrote. Not specifically melodic, but I just asked him, what do you like? Because from his perspective, I think he felt that he had to write songs that were going to please his audience. But my attitude was, you can't possibly know who these people are, what they really want. All you can do is approach them from the perspective of being a performer who they love, which means that they're going to like what you do if you've put your heart and your soul into it. So let's proceed from that perspective instead of trying to please them. you know.
Hmm.
And when it came back to it, what he really liked was melodic songs. And from that conversation actually came a couple of songs that went up on the record, Fell on Black Days and of course Black Hole Sun.
That is really interesting. Black Hole Sun is Soundgarden's biggest song, and Chris Cornell wasn't particularly thrilled about that. Black Hole Sun was released as the third single from the band's fourth studio record Superunknown on May 13, 1994, eventually reaching the #1 spot on the US mainstream rock charts. Though the success of that song opened up many new doors for Soundgarden, Chris Cornell wasn't elated about the fact Black Hole Sun became the biggest song from Superunknown. The following is a quote from Chris himself. Probably what bummed me out about Superunknown as far as questions go was that the song that was most focused on was Black Hole Sun. That was probably the song with the most ambiguous and the least focused lyrics. No one seems to get this, but Black Hole Sun is sad. But because the melody is really pretty, everyone thinks it's almost chipper, which is ridiculous. It's funny because hits are usually sort of congruent, sort of an identifiable lyric idea, and that song pretty much had none. The chorus lyric is kind of beautiful and easy to remember. Other than that, I sure didn't have an understanding of it after I wrote it. I was just sucked in by the music and I was painting a picture with the lyrics. There was no real idea to get across. Lyrically, it's probably the closest to me just playing with words for words' sake of anything I've written. I guess it worked for a lot of people who heard it, but I have no idea how you'd begin to take that one literally. Michael Beinhorn produced Black Hole Sun. He recalled the following about recording the vocals of the song with Chris Cornell. After the first time Chris sang it, he turned to me after a full day's worth of work, after listening to it, and went, "It's not good enough." I mean, it's tough to say that to an artist, but when an artist says that to you about his own work, you're like, "I love this guy. This is fantastic." I was like, "Okay, man, I'm with you 100%. Do what you've got to do." So he came back 1 week later, went back in, and we did the vocal that you hear. In terms of the vocals on Black Hole Sun, Chris Cornell recalls the following. When I sing it, there are elements of the Beatles in it and Led Zeppelin that I get from it, and also a little bit of the Syd Barrett era of Pink Floyd. I think the Beatles is one band that if I'm working on a song arrangement or if I have some idea for a song and there's a little bit of a Beatles quality to it, I never avoid that. I always will steer into it. Considering how often the lyrics to major hit songs are analyzed, I think it's really interesting to hear directly from Chris Cornell that there was no real idea to get across with Black Hole Sun. With that said, however, there is one specific line in the song that does seem to suggest there is a message here. That line comes from the second verse of the song when Chris Cornell sings, "Times are gone for honest men." In an interview with Rolling Stone from 1995, Chris Cornell spoke about this line. It's really difficult for a person to create their own life and their own freedom. It's going to become more and more difficult, and it's going to create more and more disillusioned people who become dishonest and angry. There's so much stepping on the backs of other people in our profession. We've been so lucky that we've never had to do that. Part of it was because of our own tenacity, and part of it was because we were lucky. So how exactly did the song come together? I'm going to be discussing that and more in this video. Hey, my name's Daniel. If you're new to my channel and you like rock music, make sure to subscribe. Everything I do here is 100% DIY, and your subscription does go a long way to help support this channel. Soundgarden was formed as a band in 1984, and although they had success over the course of their first 10 years, it really wasn't until 1994 and Superunknown, specifically with Black Hole Sun, that the band really took off commercially. 10 years in the life of a band is a long time, and over the course of those 10 years, Soundgarden went through a lot of ups and downs, yet they kept their integrity and were able to succeed. Now, when it comes to Black Hole Sun specifically, not only is it Soundgarden's biggest song, it's also their most recognizable music video. I'll be expanding on that a little later. As to how Chris Cornell came up with the song, the idea came to him during a drive home from a recording studio. I wrote it in my head driving home from Bear Creek Studio in Woodinville, a 35-40-minute drive from Seattle. It sparked from something a news anchor said on TV, and I heard wrong. I heard blah blah blah, Black Hole Sun, blah blah blah. I thought that would make an amazing song title, but what would it sound like? It all came together, pretty much the whole arrangement, including the guitar solo that's played beneath the riff. I spent a lot of time spinning those melodies in my head so I wouldn't forget them. I got home and whistled it into a dictaphone. The next day, I brought it into the real world, assigning a couple of key changes in the verse to make the melodies more interesting. Then I wrote the lyrics, and that was similar, a stream of consciousness based on the feeling I got from the chorus and the title. By late 1992, Soundgarden began writing material for their upcoming record, though a lot of this material wasn't created together as a band. What generally happened during this period is that the individual band members wrote material on their own, and then showcased that material to the rest of the band, after which they would polish up the songs together as a group. Chris Cornell is the one who came up with Black Hole Sun. He said the following in 1997. Generally, the songs I've been most proud of have been the least likely ones. It's weird. I wrote Black Hole Sun in about 15 minutes, and it was a big hit, but I spent weeks and weeks on other songs that weren't. As mentioned, the song was produced by Michael Beinhorn, who in fact was the lead producer on the entire Superunknown record. Interestingly, Soundgarden itself was also involved in producing the record to a certain extent. As a matter of fact, the band was involved in the production side of things for all 6 of their records. Nevertheless, when it comes to Superunknown and Black Hole Sun in particular, Michael Beinhorn was the lead producer. Soundgarden's 2 previous records, Badmotorfinger and Louder Than Love, were both produced by Terry Date. And although both records, particularly Badmotorfinger, were successful, the band wanted to try something different. On why Soundgarden chose to work with Michael Beinhorn, Chris Cornell once stated the following: "He definitely was involved in a lot of records that I thought were great, which is why I thought he'd be the perfect choice, and clearly Superunknown turned out great." One of the unique things Michael Beinhorn did during the recording process of Superunknown is that he would have Chris Cornell listen to Frank Sinatra before recording vocals. In terms of the lyrics for the song, Chris Cornell once said the following: "Lyrically, it didn't seem to be something that would be that easily relatable. It was very stream of consciousness to me. I didn't go over it and edit it. It is as it came out, and that's it. It felt right, and I let go. But it's very esoteric, and the only thing about it, I think, that makes sense in terms of how it could have been an international hit is singing the lines of the chorus. But when you don't overthink it or even think of it in any way, just let it be what it is creatively, maybe that strikes a chord in people because there's no analytical mind polluting it." As discussed, the studio where Black Hole Sun was recorded was Bad Animal Studio. The resident engineer at the studio at the time was Adam Kasper. Adam Kasper worked as an engineer on Superunknown and would go on to produce Soundgarden's next 2 records, Down on the Upside and King Animal. Adam Kasper once recalled the following about recording the vocals for Black Hole Sun: "Doing the vocals was challenging in a lot of ways. Chris sings full voice on some of these songs, and one of the problems was being able to get the headphone mix up above his internal volume. So when you're singing and you're screaming, you can hear yourself, but you have to hear the music up above, and it's just so loud and feeding back." Now, interestingly, according to Chris Cornell, the band almost got Adam Kasper fired from the studio during the recording process for Superunknown. "We almost got Adam Kasper fired. He was the sole employee of the studio that was around us, the guy that we allowed to be around us. At some point, I think we just got really destructive and he didn't stop us, pretty much destroying the control room, and he almost got fired. The one thing that stopped us and got us to put our behavior in check was the fact that we didn't want poor Adam to lose his job." Thankfully, Adam Kasper didn't get fired, and he and Soundgarden developed a long relationship with each other. Now, in terms of the sound of Black Hole Sun, it has a very prominent experimental quality, same with the Superunknown album as a whole. The following is from Adam Kasper: "It doesn't sound like a stale 90s record. The sounds, the approach were all very analog and organic, but also kind of pushing a lot of boundaries, so I think that's why it still sounds good today. There is something I think is really interesting. Beinhorn told me that he always had this electronic music agenda when he was making that record, because he was from New York and he had worked with experimental musician Bill Laswell, and they were into a pretty electronic kind of approach to music back in the 90s. I think he wanted to incorporate some of that into a rock record. I think he kind of did with some of the way the snares and things are overly compressed. I listened to that today and I was like, oh yeah, it kind of does do that. It's cool." The album has gone on to be Soundgarden's most commercially successful. Reflecting on this, Michael Beinhorn once said the following: "To know that it's influenced so many people musically, that it's actually touched people and helped them go further in their own lives, to me, is the single most proud thing. Knowing that I played a role in that, it means so much. I am forever grateful to have been part of it in some small way." The music video for Black Hole Sun was directed by English filmmaker Howard Greenhall and was released in June of 1994. The following is from Chris Cornell as to how the music video came to be: "We just read treatments for it, and Howard Greenhall's treatment just read weird as the video turned out. I suggested we pick one that we want, try to find a great one, and let the guy do whatever he wants. We should just be there and not emote, not pretend to be excited to play the song, deadpan, stand there, and do absolutely nothing. We chose his treatment because it seemed interesting. I told him on the phone, we're not going to do anything. You're not going to get anything out of us. We're just going to stand there because we don't want to do this anymore." Somehow, for whatever reason, he loved that. I love the video because it worked. It just happened to be a guy with a great idea who happened to believe in our notion that we're reluctant video stars who are going to give you nothing. The contrast of us giving you nothing and your vision is actually going to be better than if we're jumping around acting like crazy rock people and you're doing these flash jump cut edits and crazy lighting. We're weird enough as it is, and we're tired of trying to not be. It worked. It was a big lesson. If you get out of somebody's way or collaborate in the right way, a good thing can come out of it." Ultimately, the song ended up becoming a major success globally. In the US specifically, Black Hole Sun reached number 9 on the top 40 charts, number 2 on the alternative airplay charts, and number 1 on the mainstream rock charts. To this day, the song remains the band's biggest hit. For instance, as of the time of this recording, the YouTube video for Black Hole Sun has around 182 million views. Soundgarden's second biggest video is Fell on Black Days with around 47 million views. Both Fell on Black Days and Black Hole Sun were released as singles from the Superunknown record.